Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a story from World War II that is just incredible and honestly wildly misunderstood. It's this crazy collision between the beautiful game of football and literally some of the darkest days in human history. We're talking about FC Start, a team made up mostly of former professional players stuck in occupied Kiev, and the legendary events of August 1942. So let's just dive right in. Right off the bat, I want to hit you with the question that's basically shrouded this whole event in mystery for decades. Did a football team really choose death over losing to the Nazis? I mean, it sounds like a Hollywood script, right? The idea of these players willingly facing down a firing squad just to claim a moral victory on the pitch. It's a super powerful narrative. But as we're going to see, the actual history here is way more nuanced and, honestly, a lot more fascinating. For years, post-war Stalinist propaganda essentially pushed what we can call the Soviet myth. This is the version where the players were supposedly ordered by an armed SS referee to lose, heroically refused to do the Nazi salute, and then were summarily executed right there on the grass, still in their red jerseys. But the historical reality? It tells a totally different story. The match was actually played fairly, and the players were arrested days later because they were suspected of having ties to the Soviet secret police. The real truth is so much more complex and deeply human than the propaganda ever let on.
Section 1. The Legend of the Match. Historian Kevin E. Simpson summed the matchup up perfectly with just 4 words: fascism against Bolshevism. And that really hits the nail on the head for how propaganda on both sides framed these games. It wasn't just a simple game of football anymore, It was totally co-opted. It became a proxy war for ideological dominance. The occupying Nazis wanted to prove their so-called racial and athletic superiority, while the Soviets later needed a narrative of absolute, unyielding resistance to wipe away any rumors of local collaboration.
Section 2. Football in occupied Kiev.
Okay, we really need to understand the incredibly grim historical context here. Back in 1941, during Operation Barbarossa, the Nazis advanced incredibly fast, and the city of Kiev fell. The Soviet Red Army suffered a massive, completely devastating defeat. We're talking over 90% of their defending forces either killed or captured. In the aftermath, a severe famine gripped the occupied city. The occupying forces initiated horrific massacres of civilians, most notably the atrocities at the Babi Yar ravine. Now, amidst all this unimaginable devastation, the German administration decided to launch a Hearts and Minds campaign. They were trying to pacify the traumatized citizens, and surprisingly, part of that meant letting local sports resume. But make no mistake, for everyone in Kiev, survival was the absolute priority, not sport.
Section 3. The formation of FC Start.
So, under the occupation, all official Soviet organizations and clubs, including giants like Dynamo Kiev and Lokomotiv Kiev, were completely dissolved. The former professional players from these teams were left incredibly vulnerable. They were mostly in their mid to late 30s, past their athletic prime, and just desperate for basic food security for their families. Eventually, they wound up getting these grueling jobs at Bakery No. 1, just churning out bread for the city. It was there that the bakery's director, a Czech engineer named Josef Kordik, encouraged them to band together. He essentially gave them a reason to play again, and that is how FC Start was born.
But actually stepping onto the pitch, that was a massive risk. These guys were facing literally an impossible choice. On the one hand, they could choose to compete in this new German-approved league, but then they risked being branded as Nazi collaborators by their fellow citizens and eventually by the returning Soviet authorities. On the flip side, if they abstained and refused to play, they were staring down starvation, the loss of their bakery jobs, or severe punishment from deeply paranoid occupiers. So they chose to play, walking this incredibly razor-thin line of survival.
And wow, when they played, they absolutely dominated. Over the summer of 1942, they went on this unbelievable winning streak. On June 7th, they beat the Ukrainian nationalist team Ruk 7-2. Then throughout June and July, they easily brushed aside a Hungarian garrison team 6-2, another Hungarian side called MSG Wall 5-1, and completely crushed a Romanian army team 11-0. Their sheer excellence forced the Nazis to pay attention. The occupiers realized FC Start was giving the locals hope, so they demanded a match against their best military team, Flakefell. And on August 6th, FC Start stunned them and won 5-1. Obviously, the Nazis immediately demanded a rematch.
Section 4. The Truth of August 9.
Okay, let's lay out the basic facts of this infamous rematch. August 9, 1942, at the Zenith Stadium in Kiev. FC Start is facing off against Flakefell again, a really strong team made up of Luftwaffe pilots and anti-aircraft artillery soldiers. In front of roughly 2,000 spectators, FC Start actually found themselves down early in the game. But they dug deep, rallied back with incredible skill, and ultimately secured a 5-3 victory.
Now, what's really fascinating is how the actual historical records completely tear apart that cinematic myth we talked about earlier. There was no SS officer serving as a biased referee. There weren't heavily armed soldiers with attack dogs lining the pitch, threatening the players. Eyewitness accounts from the time show the match was actually played cleanly and fairly with zero blatant manipulation. And honestly, the most telling detail? After the match, both teams just hung out, drank some homemade vodka together, and even posed for a completely relaxed, mixed team photograph. It was just a peaceful end to a very competitive game.
Section 5. The tragic aftermath.
If we trace the timeline, things get incredibly dark, but not because of what happened on the field. The real tragedy began with a denunciation to the Gestapo. It came from Georgy Shvetsov, the coach of the rival team, Rook, who was incredibly bitter after his squad suffered an 8-0 defeat to start, just days after the Flacholf match. On August 18th, a full 9 days after the famous game, the Gestapo showed up at the bakery and arrested the players. They were subjected to brutal interrogations. But the Gestapo wasn't asking about winning a football game. They were paranoid about potential ties to the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, and suspected sabotage plans. Tragically, months later, several of the players were sent to the Sirets concentration camp and executed.
The fate of these men is just undeniably tragic. 4 players, Nikolai Kartikov, Ivan Kuzmenko, Alexei Klemenko, and Nikolai Truzevich, were executed months after their arrest. But the nightmare actually didn't even end when the Nazi occupation did. When Soviet forces eventually liberated Kiev, the surviving FC Start players weren't welcomed as heroes. Instead, they were investigated by their own government, suspected of collaborating with the enemy, simply because they played in the German league. It took literally decades for the Soviet authorities to finally drop those charges, and they weren't officially recognized as heroes until 1971. Like one survivor later pointed out, they were really victims of 2 totalitarian systems.
Section 6. The real meaning of defiance.
When we take a step back and look at all this, the reason why FC Start defied the Nazis wasn't some suicidal rebellion during a 90-minute football match. Their real defiance was their endurance. It was their unyielding excellence on the pitch. It was about stepping out there and giving a glimmer of hope and national pride to a completely traumatized, starving city. Shifting the lens from this cinematic martyrdom to a story about daily, grinding survival, that makes their true story so much more inspiring.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question that really forces you to think. What does true resistance look like when merely surviving is a crime? The real story of FC Start and the people of Kiev is just this incredible reminder of the timeless resilience of the human spirit when faced with truly impossible circumstances. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.